In the year 1945, in the Egyptian desert, a man named Muhammad Ali was digging the earth looking for fertilizer for his crops. He had no idea he was about to unearth the greatest secret the church had hidden for 2,000 years. Inside a sealed clay jar, he found 13 leather-bound books, and when he opened the first one, his hand trembled. Because there, written in words that seemed to come from another world, was a gospel that should never have been read, a gospel that powerful men tried to erase from history. And at this very moment, you're going to discover what was written on those pages and why they wanted you never to know. Imagine for a moment that you're in the year 367 after Christ. You live in Alexandria, Egypt, one of the most important cities in the Christian world. The streets smell of incense and spices. The sun burns your skin as you walk through the narrow alleys. And then you hear a rumor, a whisper spreading from mouth to mouth, spoken with fear. Bishop Athanasius has just sent a letter that would change Christianity forever. In this letter, he lists exactly which books can be read by Christians. 27 books, not one more, not one less. And all the others, all those gospels that had been circulating through Christian communities for decades, perhaps centuries, were declared heretical, forbidden, dangerous. And you know what happens to dangerous books in that era? They are burned. But some men, some courageous or desperate scribes, couldn't bring themselves to burn those texts because they knew there was something too valuable to be lost. So they did what anyone would do if protecting a treasure. They hid them. They rolled the manuscripts in leather, placed them inside clay jars, sealed them with wax, and buried them in the desert where no one would find them. At least not for 1,500 years. Now follow me to the desert of Nag Hammadi in 1945. Muhammad Ali was not a religious man. He was a peasant, a worker who dug the earth every day to survive. And on that day, he was looking for sabak, a type of soft earth used as fertilizer. His shovel hit something solid, a jar. He looked around. Nobody nearby. Only the hot desert wind and the heavy silence that exists only in places where humanity forgot to step. Muhammad Ali broke the jar with his own hands. And when he looked inside, he saw books, ancient books with leather covers worn by time. He couldn't read, he didn't understand what he had found, but he felt something, a shiver, as if he had violated a tomb that shouldn't be opened. He took the books home, and his mother, not knowing what they were, used some as fuel to light the stove fire. Pages that survived 1,500 years, burned in minutes, but enough survived, enough to change everything. Inside those jars was the Gospel of Thomas, a text that begins with a phrase that cuts like a blade. These are the secret words that Jesus, the living one, spoke, and which Didymus Judas Thomas wrote. Secret words. Do you perceive the weight of that? They weren't words for everyone. They were words for those who were ready, for those who could understand. And what did Jesus say there? He said things you've never heard in a sermon. Things that no priest has ever read from the pulpit. He said, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Read that again, slowly. Jesus isn't talking about blind obedience. He's talking about self-knowledge, about awakening something that already exists within you. He's saying that salvation doesn't come from outside, but from within. And that was dangerous. Because if salvation is within you, why do you need a priest? Why do you need a church? Why do you need an institution that controls what you can or cannot know? You don't. And that's why this gospel was buried. But the Gospel of Thomas wasn't alone in that jar. Along with it, other texts were found. Texts that told stories the Bible never mentioned. There was the Gospel of Philip, which spoke of Mary Magdalene in a way no one ever had. not as a repentant sinner, but as Jesus' most beloved disciple, the one who understood him more than any other. There was the apocalypse of Peter, where Peter has a vision of Jesus crucified, but Jesus is laughing at the cross, because the body isn't what matters, the spirit is. And there was the Gospel of Judas. Judas, the traitor, the villain, the man who sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. But what if everything they told you about Judas was a lie? The Gospel of Judas wasn't found in Nag Hammadi. It appeared decades later in 1978 in the hands of an antiquities dealer in Egypt. And it took almost 30 years to be translated and studied. When it was finally revealed to the world in 2006, it shocked even the most skeptical scholars. Because in this gospel, Judas isn't the villain, Judas is the hero. Jesus calls Judas aside and tells him, "You will surpass all of them, because you will sacrifice the man who clothes me." Do you understand what this means? Jesus is asking Judas to betray him, not out of betrayal, but out of love. Because someone needed to do the dirty work. Someone needed to fulfill the divine plan. And Judas, the most faithful of disciples, accepted to carry this burden. He accepted being hated by humanity eternally, so that Jesus could be crucified, so that redemption could happen. And the church never wanted you to know this, because if Judas isn't the traitor, if Judas is the sacrificed one, then the entire narrative of good versus evil, obedience versus rebellion, saved versus condemned crumbles. Now you must be wondering, why were these Gospels excluded? The official answer is theological. They say these texts were Gnostic, that they promoted a heretical vision of Christianity, that they weren't inspired by God. But the real answer, the answer no one wants to say, is political. In the 4th century, Emperor Constantine unified the Roman Empire under a single religion, Christianity. But there were dozens of versions of Christianity, dozens of communities with different beliefs, dozens of gospels circulating, and an empire cannot be unified with dozens of truths. So the church did what every power does when it wants to control. It chose a narrative and destroyed all the others. The Gospels that spoke of inner knowledge were burned, because inner knowledge is dangerous. People who think for themselves don't obey blindly. The Gospels that elevated women were erased, because a church controlled by men couldn't allow Mary Magdalene to be seen as equal to the apostles. The Gospels that questioned the crucifixion, original sin, the need for intermediaries between God and man, were buried. And for 1500 years, it worked. But let's go back a little further in time. Let's go to the 2nd century after Christ. At that time, Christianity was still young, still forming. There was no official Bible yet. There was no Vatican. There was no Pope. What existed were communities scattered throughout the Mediterranean. Communities that gathered in houses, in caves, in secret places. And each of these communities had their own stories about Jesus, their own letters, their own Gospels. In Alexandria, there were communities that followed Gnostic teachings. They believed that the material world was a prison, that the true God wasn't the creator of this world, but something much greater, much more distant, and that Jesus came to teach the way back, the way of knowledge. The word gnosis in Greek means exactly that. Knowledge, not intellectual knowledge, but experiential knowledge. Knowledge that transforms, knowledge that liberates. And for the Gnostics, this knowledge didn't come from outside. It came from within. Each person carried within themselves a divine spark, a spark of the true God. And Jesus' role was to help people awaken this spark, not through dogmas, not through rituals, but through direct experience of the divine. Can you see why this was a threat? Imagine a church trying to consolidate power, trying to become the only intermediary between God and humanity. And suddenly, a group of people emerges saying, you don't need intermediaries, that you can find God alone, within you, without a priest, without a bishop, without an institution. This wasn't just heresy, it was revolution, and revolutions need to be crushed. So in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Orthodox Church began a systematic campaign of destruction. Gnostic leaders were persecuted, their texts were burned, their communities were dissolved, and gradually the memory of these teachings was erased, until only one story remained, the official story, the story the Church wanted to tell. But here's the thing about truth. It has a strange way of surviving. Even when buried, even when burned, even when forgotten, it comes back. And in 1945, it came back. When the Nag Hammadi manuscripts were discovered, the academic world was shocked, because there, preserved by Egypt's dry desert, were texts that were thought to be lost forever. Texts that the Church Fathers mentioned in their writings, but only to condemn them. Texts that no living person had read for over 1,000 years. And when scholars began translating these texts, something extraordinary happened. They realized that early Christianity was much more diverse, much richer, much more complex than anyone had imagined. There wasn't a single way to be Christian. There were dozens, hundreds, and many of them were deliberately erased. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, doesn't tell the story of Jesus' life. It doesn't speak of his birth. It doesn't speak of miracles. It doesn't speak of the crucifixion or resurrection. It's simply a collection of 114 sayings, words that Jesus supposedly spoke, and many of these words are deeply enigmatic, almost like Zen koans, phrases that don't make sense at first glance, but if you meditate on them, if you let them penetrate deep into your consciousness, they begin to reveal layers of meaning. Jesus says in the Gospel of Thomas, "He who drinks from my mouth will become like me, and I will become like him, and the hidden things will be revealed to him." What does this mean? It means Jesus isn't placing himself above his followers. He's saying, you can become like me. You can reach the same level of consciousness. You can have access to the same mysteries. This is radically different from Orthodox Christianity, where Jesus is the only Son of God, where there's an insurmountable distance between the human and the divine, where you can never be like Jesus. You can only worship him, obey him, and hope he intercedes for you. But in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus is saying, you can become Christ, you can become divine, because the divine is already within you, and the Church couldn't allow that. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, another text found separately but around the same time, tells an even more disturbing story for orthodoxy. In it, Mary Magdalene has a vision, and she shares this vision with the other disciples. Peter becomes furious. He says, "Did the Savior really speak with a woman without our knowledge? Did he prefer her to us?" And Levi responds to Peter, "If the Savior made her worthy, who are you to reject her? Surely the Savior knows her very well. That's why he loved her more than us. More than us." Mary Magdalene wasn't just a follower. She was the principal disciple, the one who understood most, the one who saw most. And that, in a deeply patriarchal culture, was unacceptable. So the Church did what it always did with powerful women. It distorted the narrative. It transformed Mary Magdalene into a repentant prostitute, into a figure of sin and redemption, but never into a spiritual leader, never into an apostle, never into the one Jesus loved most. And for centuries this lie was repeated, until it became truth, until no one questioned it anymore. But now, with these Gospels in our hands, the truth is rising to the surface. And with it, uncomfortable questions. If the Church lied about Mary Magdalene, what else did it lie about? If the Church destroyed Gospels, what other truths did it destroy? If the Church chose one narrative and erased all others, what was left out? And perhaps the most important question of all, why? Why so much effort to hide? Why so much fear of knowledge? Why so much terror at the idea that people could find God on their own? The answer is simple, and at the same time devastating, because if you don't need a church to find God, the church loses its power, loses its authority, loses its reason to exist. And institutions, like any living organism, fight to survive. They'll do anything to protect their existence, including lying, including destroying, including burying the truth in the desert and praying it's never found. But it was found, and now you know. So I ask you now, at this moment, as you watch this, what else have they hidden from you? What other truths were buried in the desert, burned in bonfires, erased from history? And why have you never questioned this before? Perhaps because it's easier to believe what they told you, more comfortable to follow the ready-made narrative, safer not to ask questions. But you made it here. You watched until the end, and that means something. It means a part of you, a deep, restless part, hungry for truth, knows there's more. And that part of you, that's the part they tried to bury. But like those gospels in the desert, it never completely disappeared. If this video touched you in any way, if it ignited something inside you, leave a comment saying, "I saw." Just that, I saw. Because sometimes recognizing the truth is the first step to unearthing it. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this. But only if you have the courage to question everything you were taught. Until the next video, if you're ready for what comes next.